Hey guys, Trev here from SpineWise, and today I want to talk to you about hip bursitis. So you might have heard this a whole lot of other names like trochanteric bursitis, but the reality is that hip bursitis is really a painful, debilitating condition that affects everybody at some stage in their life, quite commonly. So things that people experience with it are things like pain on the side of their hip, pain on moving their hip forward and backwards, clicking in the hip when they lift the leg up and down, and some people may only notice when laying on it at night that you start to get pain on the side of the hip, whilst others may also start to feel numbness down the upper part of the lateral aspect of their thigh. So what is it and how does this thing work? Okay, so let me start by explaining what a bursa is, because bursitis really means inflammation of a bursa. But what is a bursa? So a bursa is kind of like a little sack of fluid. It's kind of like if you've seen all those images of silicone breast implants. They're kind of like a little silicone implant like that. So there's a tiny little bubble of fluid which is used to allow one surface to flow over the other without creating friction or irritation. So in the hip, the main one we're talking about when we start talking about bursa and the hip bursitis is one that sits on the outside through here, on this very outside of the hip. And what it basically does is it allows for a muscle in particular called your tensor fascial lata, which comes from the front area of your hip through this area here, runs down the side of your leg and attaches to the knee. So it basically allows this muscle to flow over the top of your hip without actually rubbing on the hip and wearing itself out. So the bursa actually provides a protective mechanism. So what does bursitis mean? Okay, so bursitis is the situation where this bursa here actually becomes inflamed. So rather than looking like this, it starts swelling and it starts becoming more like this. So for some people, when you poke into the side here, you'll kind of feel a little bit of a puffy, fluidy area, which is the actual bursa that's enlarged. If you ever damaged a knee, or if you had runner's knee or patellar tracking problems, you'll sometimes find a very similar puffy experience around or under your kneecap, which is another bursa which often becomes inflamed. So the main reason this one here becomes inflamed is because the TFL muscle which crosses over it is pushing firmly on it and irritating it along the way. So it's dysfunction of the TFL, or over-contraction, if you like, of the TFL, which really does seem to set this up. So why do we have an irritation in there to begin with? Well, there's a few different reasons why this can occur. The first one is that this muscle is actually attaching down on the lateral aspect of your knee, right down the bottom near the knee itself. So if there's some instability or rotational problems around the knee, this can often cause this to start contracting a little bit firmer and then pulling the muscle actually inwards in towards the bursa and irritating it, kind of squashing it, if you want to call it that. But the most common reason we see is actually due to changes in your hip flexor function. So one of the main hip flexors passes down through here and attaches towards the knee, and what it's really doing is it's pulling the hip or the leg up towards the hip. So we're getting this kind of motion. Now when this hip flexor doesn't function very well, you still need to lift your leg. So the body uses different muscle to do the job. This is what we call recruitment. And the two that it tends to use more of is another hip flexor which comes from the lumbar spine across to this area here called your psoas. And then it also uses your TFL muscle, which we've already spoken about through here. So remember, the TFL is really designed to bring the leg out. It's designed to do this action. So when it starts having to do this action as well, it's a job that's not really well designed for. So the result of it is it needs to get bigger to compensate for it. So it's like when you go to the gym and you start lifting weights and you're doing your bicep curls every day. And as you're doing them, the body has to adapt in order for you to keep doing that, and it does that by growing the muscle. And the same thing happens with this situation here. So the TFL starts growing, it becomes bigger, or undergoes what we call hypertrophy, and the result of that hypertrophy is the enlarging of that muscle creates more tension and again pulls it in towards the bursa, creating that rubbing experience again. So it's the irritation directly which is creating the problem for most people. So how do we deal with this? So the obvious thing is stop the TFL from doing that. So the logical thing goes, hey, just stretch it and, spiky ball, foam roller, these type of things to kind of iron them out. But in reality, we need to stop the overcontraction to begin with. The way we do that is finding the area of deficit, the area which isn't functioning as well as it should be, and correcting that. So if we have a hip flexor that's not working very well through here, we need to find the cause of that. And that can be jaw issues, it can be balance issues, it can be brain function, it can be something in the lower spine, it can be something in the hip itself. So we need to find that. If we can get rid of that, then there's no need for the TFL to actually be over-contracting, and then we can start doing the things we need to free it up if need be. If we're talking about knee instability patterns, then we need to start looking at that. So we need to start talking about the lock home mechanism, the screw home that allows you to lock your knees straight. Is that working properly? And the small muscles that function around there to guide that, are they working correctly? And issues with them can come from the cervical spine, from the lower spine, from the knee itself, from the ankle, the foot. There's a whole lot of different areas. So we need to isolate which is the cause of that imbalance, what is causing that, rectify that. Then once we've done that, then we can go about resetting the TFL and bringing it back to its normal function to take the tension off the bursa. If we get the tension off the bursa generally from our experience starts calming down. If it doesn't, then we can start looking at anti-inflammatory means to try and reduce it. But we need to rectify the function before we start talking about how to change the actual issues that are going on with the bursa itself. A lot of approaches nowadays are more aimed about just trying to reduce the inflammation of the bursa. Things like cortisone injections and things like this, when really we need to get to the root of the imbalance before we get to that. And majority of the time, from my experience at least, you don't need to even get down that path if you rectify it. Anyway guys, so that's a quick introduction into trochanteric or hip bursitis. If you have any questions with it, post it up. If you're suffering with hip bursitis and you want some more information, just send me a message. Always happy to help you out. And even point you in the right direction for things that you might be able to do for yourself or people that might be help you too if you can't get to our team. Anyway guys, have a fantastic start to the year, and we'll see you in the next vid. Bye for now.